Hello, and welcome to our first practice together with charcoal. We are going to be focused today on accurate shape, size, and location of your values. At the end, you'll ask yourself, does your shading match the shape, size, and location of the shading in the reference photo? To get set up, we have a couple of things that we are going to do slightly differently from our past units. We are going to turn our paper so that we have the value scale closest to us. And again, we are going to make those outside edge lines. We're going to divide that in half, but we want to have 6 spaces instead of 8. So I'm just going to add 2 evenly spaced lines to that half and 2 evenly spaced lines to this half so that I have 6 values. We're going to turn it back and we're going to label 0 for white, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now we are going to turn our paper back again so the value scale is closest to us and we can see right when our pencil is touching those line edges. So we are going to get started with our top value, and we are using the black charcoal pencil to give ourselves a border. And I'm going up against those edges and trying my hardest to make those as crisp as possible. When you're working with charcoal pencils, these get very dull very quickly, so I am often turning my pencil in my hands to find that new crispy point. So you always kind of flatten one side because it's such a soft material, but then when you turn it, you have an automatic new sharp spot. Now, we have filled this in fairly solidly. The next step is to blow away your dust. This allows you to see where those leftover white spots might be so that you can fill in all the way to the edge. Now we are going to only fill up to value 3. So we're going to start in value 4 now, and it's just a slightly lighter pressure. So we want it to look lighter than our first section. And then 3 is going to be the lightest we can color with this charcoal pencil. Now I'm going to go back into this space and I'm going to work on helping these to transition together, and I'm making sure that I've filled in along the outside edges of my value scale. So make sure that you're going all the way up against those lines and not leaving white patches. Once you've got a nice smooth transition, we're going to switch to your blending stump, and we always begin by just checking how dark it is and cleaning it off. I'm going to start in value 1, which is the lightest I can make, and I want to have a nice smooth transition into white here. So we're just pressing lighter to transition. For value 2, I'm just pressing a little bit harder, and then I'm going to work into value 3. And with value 3, I'm going to snag some of that charcoal and I'm bringing it down to kind of help fill in value number 2 a little bit more solidly. Next, I'm working in value 4 and just helping to blend that out. And then the last step, I don't really want to blend very much out of value 5 because we want to keep that nice and dark. So the next step, once we've blended with our blending stump, is to blow away the remaining dust. Now we can really see where we need to continue adding our charcoal. And one nice thing about working with charcoal is that you lay down that first layer and it's much easier to draw with this pencil on top of a layer of charcoal than it is to draw on top of just plain printer paper. So I'm using this as a chance to work my way all the way back down to value 2. And I'm just barely brushing this over the top, and I'm only adding it in those patches that are slightly lighter or along the edges where we often have white gaps that are left behind. So we're just going to go once more over it, and I'm going to take my blending stump for our final step, and we are just smudging in any spots that kind of stand out as looking a little bit crispy. We want to get rid of that texture that comes along with charcoal. We're also making sure that we blended smoothly out at the bottom. And if you are working at the bottom, that lighter end, make sure you're cleaning off your blending stump every time you go into a lighter space so that you don't accidentally darken it more than you intended to. So spend a couple more seconds working on smoothing out your value scale. We want to double check that we've got this filled in super solidly up at the top, and that whole fifth value should be completely black. And one mistake students often make here is that when you blend with your blending stump, it steals some of that black. So double check and make sure that you've got enough there. All right, now we are going to turn our papers, and we are drawing a line coming from the outermost edge of our circle, from the outside right and that bottom edge, and we're just making that triangle so that it's level with the outside lines of the rectangle. We're doing this to help make sure that we know that it's in the correct location, since that's the focus of this practice. We are going to connect the top of that triangle with the bottom, and then we're going to add in our little triangle of value. And remember that this line where it's separating the table and the top background area should be right in the middle of that triangle. Go ahead and get that set up. Next, we are taking our charcoal pencil and we're filling in our darkest value on the right-hand side of that triangle, and we're working our way out to about a 3 at the very end here. Now, rather than using our pencil to blend this and have a transition out into this highlight space, we are going to switch to our blending stump. I'm going to clean it off, and I'm going to fill this space first. I'm not even touching that area of charcoal above it. I just filled it with what was already on my blending stump. So go ahead and fill that space, and don't touch the actual charcoal. Next, we're going to clean our blending stump off a lot, and we want it to be very, very light for this next step. What we're doing next is we are looking at our reference photo, and we are really paying attention to the outside shape that we see here. So we've got this eyeball line that we are essentially trying to create. So I'm going to look at where this starts, and I'm going to hold my finger there so I can really pay attention, and then I'm going to start my edge over here, and I'm just drawing this outside line for where my eyeball is, and it's not going to touch the charcoal yet. So we're just adding this super light outline. Next, I'm going to clean my blending stump off once more, and I'm just going to use the side of my blending stump to really try to blend that line out into the white space and to leave a white eyeball shape left behind. Take a look up at the board and make sure that you see this white eyeball shape and the white space that we've left, and then this line. Next, we're working our way towards that charcoal, and as we do so, we are pressing harder and harder as we work our way down. And we don't want to touch the charcoal quite yet, so we're leaving just like a skinny white gap. So go ahead and take a look up at the board and check out this skinny white gap of value that we left. The next step, we are going to start on our lighter side of our triangle, and right on top of this top edge, I am just making a little pass of circles, just like the tiniest little circles, and I'm using that to blend up into that space that I was just working on. I'm going to clean my blending stump off again, because when we touched that, we just got a lot of dark value on it. And now I'm going to look for any section where there's still a line, and I'm going to set my clean blending stump down right on top of that line, and I'm just making little circles right over that line that's dividing my two sections. And I'm just trying to get rid of any divisions. Now, once we've blended the top edge of our triangle, we are going to start on the lighter side of our triangle down here, and we're just using small circles to blend out the texture of the value that we added with our charcoal pencil. And we're going all the way back up to where we blended it to be solid black. And we're just working on helping it have a nice smooth transition. We're trying to encourage that eyeball shape, so we're bringing this up at the corner here to kind of wrap around that eyeball. We're making sure that we've left a nice highlight. And if you got a little light, sometimes when you blend it, it takes a lot of your value away. So you can always come back in with your charcoal pencil, especially in these darker areas, just to reapply some of those values. And we will blend it out with our blending stumps. And you can just take a moment to do some perfecting on your sphere. Remember, always be cleaning your blending stump off and then continuing. That's one of my biggest tips, is to really make sure you're only working with a clean blending stump, especially in these lightest areas. And this is the hardest part. This is your first practice with charcoal, having instructions, so just kind of go into this knowing that it'll just get easier as you continue to practice. Don't feel too worried if it does feel difficult at the beginning. All right, so we are going to move into the next step, which is adding the shadow on the triangle underneath our sphere. So we're going to turn our paper so that we can see right when it touches. And I want you to bring this black line further out than the triangle. So we're stretching that all the way underneath the sphere as a straight line. And then we are filling in that triangle while we can see the pencil lead touching the sphere so that we know that it's a super sharp, crisp line. We're going to bring this shadow out so it's going off of the edge. Those lines come out straight and then at the very last second kind of curve in. And we are filling this shadow solid black in the triangle, but one step lighter when we're working in the actual shadow space itself. You want to make sure that it's solid black right up against the sphere and then slowly transitions to get lighter as it works towards the edge of the paper. What we're going to do next is give ourselves our border for our background behind our sphere. So one tip I have for you is that whenever you're coloring along a line, especially with charcoal, you should be coloring on the right side of the line if you're right-handed, and vice versa if you're left-handed. So swap that if you're left-handed. But we are giving ourselves a nice crisp border, and I'm just turning my paper every time I come across something new to color that's at a different angle, so I can make sure that I'm coloring on the right side, not like the correct side, but the actual right-hand side of that line. We're doing this to make sure that we can keep a nice crisp edge on our sphere. We want to give ourselves that border going all the way around. So I'm just continuously turning my paper to make sure I'm coloring on the right-hand side, and be careful that you're not smudging your work by dragging your hand across it. Charcoal does smudge very easily. Now that we've got our border, I'm going to fill this background space, and I'm not using a full amount of pressure. We're not doing a value 5, it's closer to a value 4. So we want to leave some texture showing through. It should not be solid black. We're filling this in with small circles to avoid any lines that you might have. We don't want to have lines because those gaps that are left between the lines are difficult to fill. It's much easier to fill with small circles. I recommend holding your pencil at an angle to fill with charcoal because it will fill faster than if you just use that small surface area of the point of your pencil. This also helps to encourage having a new point, because you're flattening one side, that means that the other end will have a nice little point for you to work with. Now that we have both our shadow and our background filled, the next step is to blow away the dust. We really need to see that it is completely filled in. Next, we are going to give ourselves that same border that we just did, but with our blending stump. And we are trying very hard to make this line exactly along that edge, which is difficult to do with charcoal, so that's why we're practicing this. But we are giving ourselves that same border, so I'm turning my paper to give myself that border around the sphere with my blending stump now. And we want it to be super smooth and crisp. You can blow away your dust throughout this process to see if you are filling it in or not. Sometimes it's hard to tell because the dust is in the way or makes it look like you filled it in. So I'm rotating around, giving myself that same border. And we want that to be nice and crisp. So take your time, fill in those corners, don't leave any white gaps. Once you've got your border done, you are going to use small circles to fill that background and just eliminate any of that grainy texture. We want this to be as solid and smooth as we can get it. One nice thing is that now that we've blended out our background, and blow away your dust and check to make sure that you've filled it all the way in. And once you've done that, we have a lot of charcoal on our blending stumps. So what we're going to do now is fill in our background space just using our blending stumps. We don't have to actually draw in that value. I do want you to give yourselves the highlight that's at that little corner edge right here on the tabletop, and we're giving ourselves a border around our sphere, and then we are using our blending stumps to fill in that tabletop edge. We're going to skip the shadow for now. We don't want to get too dark on our tabletop, and if we touch that dark value, it's going to darken what we have on our blending stump. So I am leaving a little gap here. I'm going to continue giving myself that border with just my blending stump. And I'm coming around to this side of the tabletop, and I'm leaving that tiny little white sliver of highlight along the top edge. We're filling in that background space, and now that everything is filled, we can start working on our shadow. So I'm going to blend all the way up to the edge of my shadow, and I'm going right on top of that line. And I'm doing that to help soften this shadow so that it has a nice transition into the tabletop. So right along that line is the first area you'll blend. You'll do that for this second shadow line as well. We just want to soften it. Then we're going to start on our light side of our shadow, and we are just smudging away any texture until we get to this solid black space, and then we will stop. We don't want to continue using our blending stump in that darkest space because it's going to take away from those values. Now we're going to spin it back and blow away our dust, and that is going to reveal any areas that we might need to come back in and perfect. The perfecting layer with charcoal is done with both a blending stump and a charcoal pencil, and you are just looking back and forth between your reference photo and your final picture. I would say that my highlight is still too light, so I am gonna just add another little layer, a pass right here on top of that highlight just to darken it up a bit. I could probably come back in and sharpen my shadow. So I'm just adding another layer of that solid black, making sure that it's nice and dark before it blends out into that lighter medium tone. I'm making sure that my shadow edge goes all the way underneath my sphere. I think I could probably darken that. So take a look up here, make sure that you've got this additional line that's going back underneath our sphere. You can work on blending that out. And then I'm going to just kind of perfect along the edge of my sphere. And this is just kind of an individual basis. You kind of look at your sphere and see what it needs. But that was our final step. Thank you guys for watching.